All right, everybody, get ready for a wild one. Because today we are diving headfirst into some seriously controversial historical theories. We're talking about Dr. Waleed's pasted text. And let me tell you, this deep dive is going to be a real head-scratcher.
Oh, absolutely.
So to set the stage, Dr. Waleed kicks things off with a claim that's sure to ruffle some feathers. He's suggesting that the ancient Islamic Meccans and the Hashemites, like the famous Arab clan, are actually one and the same as, wait for it, the biblical Hasmonean Maccabees.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Now, I know for some of you listening, that might sound like comparing apples and oranges. So, quick refresher. The Hasmoneans, they were that Jewish dynasty ruling Judea way before the rise of Islam. They're the Maccabees from the whole Hanukkah story, fought for religious freedom against those Seleucid emperors.
Right, that Greek empire controlling a big chunk of the Middle East after Alexander the Great did his whole conquering thing.
Exactly. So, we're talking about Dr. Waleed drawing a link between this powerful Jewish dynasty and, boom, the very heart of Islam.
It's a bold claim, no doubt.
Bold is an understatement. It's like saying, I don't know the founding fathers were secretly ninjas. But here's the thing, Dr. Waleed doesn't just stop there. He goes on to suggest this connection, it isn't just some random coincidence. He's claiming history has been intentionally twisted, that powerful forces, he calls them Arab, have been working in the shadows to bury the truth about these groups' connections. He even throws around the term offspring of vipers to describe them.
Whoa, okay, so we're venturing into, let's say, conspiracy theory territory.
Right. It's a lot to unpack, but it does make you think, though, about this idea that powerful groups could manipulate historical narratives to fit their own agenda. Like, it makes you question who gets to tell history, and how do those stories get shaped over time?
It's a question historians grapple with constantly. We call it historical revisionism. Our understanding of the past, it's always evolving as we uncover new evidence and consider new perspectives.
So you're saying just because a theory challenges the accepted narrative doesn't mean it's automatically wrong? There's room for interpretation?
Exactly. But it's crucial to approach these claims, especially ones as dramatic as these, with a healthy dose of skepticism. Look at the evidence, consider any potential biases from the source, and honestly evaluate if the theory holds up historically.
And that's what we're here to do, right? Now, it's important to note that Dr. Waleed doesn't just make these grand pronouncements without offering some pretty intriguing, albeit debatable, pieces of evidence. He points to specific historical events that he claims have been misinterpreted, maybe even deliberately. And one of the most fascinating examples is this comparison he draws between the Battle of Beth Zechariah and the story of Abraham's army attacking Mecca with a whole bunch of elephants.
Elephants! All right, this is getting interesting.
Oh, it definitely is. I mean, picture it. Two historical events, centuries apart, each featuring armies with elephants attacking a holy city. It's almost like Dr. Waleed suggesting these are two sides of the same coin, just seen through completely different cultural lenses.
It's certainly a striking parallel.
It is, right. But that's where we got to put on our historian hats and ask the tough questions. The Battle of Beth Zechariah, that clash between the Maccabees and the Seleucids, it's well documented, happened in Judea, modern-day Israel. Abraham attacking Mecca, that's mostly from Islamic tradition, putting it in, well, Mecca.
And that's a pretty significant distance, even for an elephant.
Yeah, even with those long legs of theirs, that's a long trek through the desert. So it makes you wonder, how much can we trust what we read or hear about the past, especially when you're dealing with oral traditions passed down over generations?
Right, the telephone game of history.
Exactly. Details get muddled, maybe a little embellishment here and there. It's human nature.
It highlights the importance of consulting multiple sources, different perspectives, just like a detective piecing together clues from different witnesses.
And sometimes those puzzle pieces, they just don't quite fit. Like this whole thing Dr. Waleed brings up about Ishmael. Remember Ishmael, son of Abraham, cast out?
Right, but there's that discrepancy in where he ends up.
Exactly. The Bible puts him in Palestine. Islamic tradition has him in the Arabian desert. Two very different locations for one pretty important figure. It can't be both. So, are we talking literal locations here, or is there a symbolic meaning we're missing?
The age-old debate of literal versus symbolic interpretation of religious texts. It's a conversation that's been going on for centuries, and for good reason. These stories, they often work on multiple levels. You've got the surface level, those literal events, and then there are those deeper layers, those symbolic, the allegorical.
Right, like there's more to the story than meets the eye.
Exactly. To really grasp the meaning, you have to be able to navigate both those levels.
And Dr. Waleed certainly isn't afraid to dig deep. He makes this claim, and it's a doozy, that the Prophet Muhammad, like other prophets in the Quran, was a Palestinian prophet defending Jerusalem.
So, a direct challenge to the traditional narrative.
Oh yeah, the traditional story has Muhammad in Mecca and Medina. Dr. Walid's basically saying we need to hit the reset button on how we see Islamic history.
It's a bold reinterpretation, to say the least.
That's one way to put it. But it raises some important questions about how we approach history in general. It's one thing to question the accepted narrative, offer alternative interpretations, but when you start claiming conspiracies, hidden truths, that's when things can get, well, a little dicey.
Because it can erode trust. If everything's a conspiracy, then how do you know what to believe?
Exactly. And that's what we always got to be careful. Approach claims like Dr. Walid's with a healthy dose of critical thinking. Ask ourselves who benefits from pushing this particular narrative. What evidence are they using? And just as importantly, what are the potential consequences of accepting this as the truth? It's kind of like that saying, history is written by the victors, right? But what if those victors weren't who we thought they were? What if the whole story we've been told is just one side, one carefully put together narrative? Makes you think twice, huh?
Absolutely. Dr. Walid's work really makes us confront these uncomfortable questions about how we understand history. Like, who gets to decide what's true about the past? How do you even start to reconcile conflicting stories about the same event?
Yeah, it's not like history is always neat and tidy. There's got to be some messiness along the way, right?
Exactly. Historians are always wrestling with these questions. And it's not just about finding some perfect truth, because let's be real, that's pretty much impossible. It's more about understanding how different groups have interpreted and reinterpreted things over time. It's about acknowledging that there are always multiple perspectives on the same story, like trying to see the whole picture, not just one piece.
Right, like those giant tapestries. Up close, it's just threads, but you step back and there's a whole scene, a whole story.
Yeah.
So maybe Dr. Walid's theory, even if we don't agree with all of it, it's like he's asking us to step back from the usual story and see if maybe there are other patterns, other pictures hidden in history.
That's a great way to put it. And to do that, we can't just rely on one source, one interpretation. We have to consider the biases, the motivations, all the things surrounding each piece of the puzzle.
It's like detective work, right? You got to follow the clues wherever they lead.
Exactly. And sometimes, even when you do everything right, you're still left with more questions. Some pieces of the puzzle might be gone for good, others seem like they fit, but there's that nagging feeling that something's still not quite right.
And that's okay to have those questions, right?
Of course. That's what makes history so fascinating. It's not just memorizing dates and names. It's about embracing the unknown, those unanswered questions, and constantly being open to new ways of seeing the past.
So bringing it all back home for our listeners, it seems like Dr. Walid's theory, while missing some concrete proof maybe, is a good reminder that history isn't set in stone. It can be shaped and reshaped by power, by different viewpoints, by how people choose to interpret it.
Absolutely. And it reminds us all to think critically, question what we think we know, and be open to the possibility that we haven't uncovered everything about the past. And maybe more importantly, it highlights how the past still affects us today, even if we don't realize it.
So much to think about. We've covered some pretty wild territory today with Dr. Walid's theory. While we may not have all the answers, and some of these ideas are out there, it's this kind of outside-the-box thinking that challenges us and makes us look at history and the world a little differently.
It's a good reminder that the exploration of history is an ongoing process, and new discoveries and interpretations are always waiting to be unearthed.
Well said. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the fascinating and controversial ideas of Dr. Khalid Walid. Big thanks to everyone for joining us as we explore these alternative historical narratives.
Until next time, keep those minds open and keep asking those tough questions.
And we'll see you in the next episode, where we'll be diving into another fascinating corner of the world and uncovering more hidden history.